My mother kept secrets in wooden boxes. I found this one beneath her wedding dress, in the attic of the house where I grew up. The house where she raised me. The house where she taught me to bake bread on Saturday mornings and braid my hair before church. The house where she died 3 months ago, leaving me to sort through 84 years of her life packed into trunks and drawers and closets that smelled like lavender and old paper. The box was locked. The key was taped underneath, like she knew someone would find it eventually. Like she wanted someone to find it. Like this was her final confession, delivered after death when I couldn't ask her why. Inside was a single letter. The envelope was yellow with age, the edges brown and soft like old autumn leaves. The postmark said October 15, 1944. Post 758. European Theatre. It was addressed to Miss Margaret Rose Sullivan, 47 Maple Street, Portland, Maine. That was my name. My maiden name. Before I became Mrs. Robert Coldwell. Before I became someone's wife and mother and grandmother. The return address made my hands shake. Lieutenant James Patrick Hartley, 8th Air Force. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 63 years. I should tell you about James before I read his words again. Because once I open this letter, everything I thought I knew about my life will change. I can feel it already, sitting here in the dust and silence of my dead mother's attic, with afternoon light coming through the small window, making the dust particles dance like tiny ghosts. James Hartley was the first man I ever loved. The only man I ever loved, if I'm being honest with myself at 84 years old, with arthritis in my hands and memories that feel sharper than they did when I was young. I married Robert. I was a good wife. I raised 3 children and kept a clean home and made Sunday dinners that everyone said were wonderful. I planted roses every spring and hosted book club meetings and volunteered at the church bazaar. I did everything a good wife was supposed to do. But there was always a space inside me that stayed cold. A place I never let anyone touch. A room in my heart that I kept locked, even from myself. That place belonged to James. And now, sitting in my dead mother's attic, with her confession hidden beneath his letter, I'm about to find out why he never came back for me. It was 1942 when I met him. October. The leaves were turning and the air smelled like wood smoke and coming winter. I was 19, training as a nurse at Maine General Hospital. The war had taken every boy I'd grown up with and sent them across an ocean I'd never seen. My brother Thomas was in the Pacific. My cousin Eddie was somewhere in North Africa. The telegrams had already started coming to our little town, one by one, turning front porches into places of mourning. I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for something to do with my hands, something useful, something that mattered more than waiting and worrying. Then they brought in Lieutenant James Hartley. Training accident, they said. Minor burns on his hands and arms from a fuel fire during flight exercises. Nothing serious, but enough to keep him in my ward for observation. 2 weeks, the doctor said. Maybe less if he healed quickly. I remember the first thing he said to me when I came to change his bandages. Do you believe in fate, Nurse Sullivan? I rolled my eyes. Another soldier with a line, trying to charm the nurses before shipping out. I believe in clean bandages and penicillin, Lieutenant. And I believe you should hold still while I work. He laughed. A real laugh. Not the nervous kind I'd heard from boys pretending to be brave before they left. Not the hollow kind that said they knew they might not come back. Fair enough, he said. But I'm still going to marry you someday. For 2 weeks, James Hartley stayed in that hospital bed. His burns healed in 5 days. The doctor said so. But James complained of headaches, dizziness, blurred vision, ringing in his ears. Anything to buy more time, more days, more hours. I knew what he was doing. The doctors knew. The other nurses knew and teased me about it when we folded linens in the supply room. But no one said anything. No one rushed him out. Because in 1942, time was the only thing that mattered, and none of us had enough of it. Every day could be someone's last day. Every conversation could be a final conversation. So we let the boys steal a few extra hours of peace before they went back to war. We talked about everything during those 2 weeks. His childhood in Boston, growing up near the harbor, learning to sail with his grandfather. My small town in Maine, the pharmacy where my father worked, the library where I spent every Saturday afternoon, the books we loved, the places we wanted to see after the war ended. If the war ended, he told me about flying. The way the world looks small from up there like a patchwork quilt. How it made everything feel possible. How for just a little while, up in the clouds, the war didn't exist. I told him about wanting to see the ocean at night. Really see it, not just the harbor in Portland where the fishing boats came in. I wanted to see it wild and dark and endless. "I'll take you," he said. "When I come back. First thing. We'll drive all night to the coast and watch the sun come up over the water." I believed him. Everyone believed things like that in 1942. His last night at the hospital, we sat in the garden behind the east wing. It was October, and the air had that sharp cold that meant winter was coming soon. The smell of dying leaves and damp earth. His hand still wrapped in white gauze, holding mine carefully like I was something precious. We could hear the radio playing in the nurse's station. Glenn Miller. Moonlight Serenade. Someone was humming along. "Margaret Rose," he said. He always used both names like they were one word. "When I come back from this war, I'm going to marry you. I know we've only known each other 2 weeks. I know that sounds crazy. But I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I didn't laugh. I didn't tell him he was moving too fast. I didn't do any of the sensible things a 19-year-old girl should do when a soldier she barely knows talks about marriage. I just said, "Okay." He kissed me once, soft and careful like I might break, like he was trying to memorize the moment. "Wait for me," he whispered against my hair. "I will. Promise me, Margaret Rose. Promise me you'll wait." "I promise." 3 days later, James Hartley shipped out to England. Air Force. Bomber crew. I never saw him again. But I kept my promise. For 63 years, in my own way, I kept my promise. Waited. The first letter came 2 weeks after he left. I was working a double shift at the hospital when my mother brought it to me. Still in her church coat, her face bright with excitement. She thought it was romantic, this soldier writing to her daughter. Back then she thought it was romantic. The letter was 6 pages long, written in tiny careful handwriting to fit more words onto the paper. Paper was precious. Every inch mattered. James told me about England. The countryside so green it hurt to look at. The fog that rolled in every morning, thick as soup. The terrible coffee the boys made in the barracks, so strong it could strip paint. The way the English people opened their homes to the American soldiers, fed them real food. Let them pretend for an evening that they weren't thousands of miles from home. He told me about the other men in his crew. Tommy from Brooklyn who never stopped talking. Frank from Texas who played harmonica. Charlie from Oregon who carried a picture of his wife and baby daughter and kissed it before every mission. He never told me about the war itself. Never told me about the missions over Germany, the flak that tore through metal like paper, the planes that didn't come back. The friends whose bunks stayed empty. But I could read the spaces between his words. I could feel what he wasn't saying. I wrote back the same day. Told him about the patients, about the soldier who'd had both legs amputated and was learning to smile again. About my sister Dorothy's engagement to Paul Henderson, the butcher's son who'd gotten a farm deferment. About how our small town was emptying of men and filling with telegrams and gold stars in windows. Every letter from James ended the same way, always underlined twice. "Wait for me, Margaret Rose. I'm coming home to you." And I did. Waited. By the spring of 1944, we'd exchanged over 100 letters. We planned our whole lives in ink and paper. Built a future out of words and promises and hope. James wanted a small house near water. Didn't matter where, as long as he could hear the ocean. I wanted a garden, roses and tomatoes and herbs for cooking. He wanted 3 children at least. I wanted a dog, a big one, golden-colored. We'd name him Copper. I'd already picked out my wedding dress from the Sears catalog. Cream-colored with lace sleeves. $18. I was saving my nursing wages in a coffee tin under my bed. James sent me a photograph in April. Him and his crew in front of their B-17. 9 young men, arms around each other's shoulders, trying to smile like they weren't terrified. He'd written on the back, "The lucky lady. She's brought us home 23 times. Here's to 23 more." I kept that photograph on my nightstand. Looked at it every morning and every night. My mother said I was being foolish. That I was too young to promise my life to a boy I'd known for 2 weeks and 100 letters. That things were different in wartime, that people made promises they couldn't keep, that I should be practical. But she didn't understand. When you're 19 and there's a war on, 2 weeks is a lifetime. 100 letters is a marriage. I knew James Hartley better than I'd ever known anyone. Better than I knew my own family sometimes. I knew he was afraid of disappointing his father. That he hummed when he was nervous. That he underlined words twice when he meant them deeply. That he loved strawberry jam. That he couldn't draw to save his life but tried anyway in the margins of his letters. Little sketches of planes and clouds and hearts. I knew him. And he knew me. We were real, even if we'd only touched once. In September 1944, the letters stopped. Not slowly. Not with warning. Not with any goodbye. The last letter I received from James was dated September 3rd. He wrote about the weather turning colder, about the missions getting harder, about missing me. Normal things. He signed it the same way he always did. "Wait for me, Margaret Rose. I'm coming home to you." Then nothing. 1 week passed. I told myself the mail was delayed. The war was getting worse, everyone said so. The Allies were pushing into France. The Germans were desperate. Things were chaotic. Letters got lost. It happened all the time. 2 weeks passed. I started checking the mailbox 3 times a day. Morning, noon, and evening. I'd stand there on the street, hand on the metal door, heart pounding, praying. Nothing. 3 weeks. I wrote to James. Calm at first, trying to sound casual. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope you're well. The weather here is turning cold. Write when you can." Then more frantic. "James, please. I'm worried. Just tell me you're okay. Just a few words. Please." No answer. By October I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I stood at the window every evening, watching for the Western Union boy on his bicycle. The boy who brought telegrams. The boy every mother and wife and sweetheart dreaded seeing. Because if James had died, they would have sent a telegram. That's what they did. That's how you knew. The War Department notified next of kin. They notified fiancés. But no telegram came. Just silence. And somehow that was worse. In late October, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. She'd made tea. Put out the good cups. The ones we only used for special occasions or bad news. I knew what was coming before she even spoke. "Margaret," she said gently, her hand covering mine. "You need to prepare yourself, sweetheart." "For what?" "The war is brutal. Boys make promises they can't keep. They mean well, but things change. People change. And sometimes they just don't come home at all." "I would have gotten a telegram," I said. My voice sounded strange, hollow. "If he died, they would have told me. The military notifies families. They notify fiancés. We weren't officially engaged, but everyone knew. The whole town knew about the soldier who wrote to Margaret Sullivan every week." My mother looked at me with something like pity, something like impatience. "Maybe he didn't die, sweetheart. Maybe he just changed his mind. Met someone else. Happens. The war does things to people. They make promises in the heat of the moment that they can't keep when things calm down." I wanted to slap her. Wanted to scream. Wanted to tell her she was wrong. That James loved me, that he'd promised. But part of me, some small cold part, wondered if she was right. Maybe James had met someone else. An English girl with a pretty accent and no ocean between them. Someone who could actually be there with him, not just words on paper. Maybe he'd realized that promises made in a hospital garden didn't mean anything in the real world. Maybe I'd been foolish to wait. Foolish to believe. Maybe I was just a naive 19-year-old girl who'd fallen in love with a dream. Christmas 1944, I stopped checking the mail. I told myself I was moving on. Being practical. Being mature. Accepting reality like my mother had told me to. But the truth was, I just couldn't stand the disappointment anymore. Every empty mailbox felt like losing him again. Every day without a letter was another small death. My sister Dorothy got married that winter, right before Christmas. I stood beside her in a yellow dress and held her bouquet and smiled for the photographs. Everyone said I looked beautiful. Glowing, someone said. Felt like a ghost. At the reception, my mother introduced me to Robert Caldwell. 34 years old, factory manager at the shipyard. Exempt from the draft because of his essential war production work. Steady job. Good prospects. Here. Present. Real. Robert's a good man, Margaret. My mother whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my cheek. Solid. Not off chasing adventure across the ocean. You could do worse. Robert asked me to dance. He was polite about it. Respectful. His hand barely touched my waist. I said yes because I didn't know what else to do. James's photograph was still on my nightstand at home. 24 years old, arm around his crew, trying to smile like he wasn't afraid. But I was starting to forget what his voice sounded like. Robert Caldwell was kind. That's the first thing I noticed about him. Not handsome, not exciting, not the kind of man who made your heart race. He brought flowers every Sunday. Yellow roses from the florist on Main Street. He had dinner with my family every Wednesday. Roast chicken and potatoes, my mother's specialty. He never asked about the soldier I'd been writing to. Never mentioned the letters that had stopped coming. Maybe my mother told him. Maybe he just knew. Small towns talk. Everyone knew about Margaret Sullivan and her pilot who'd gone silent. Either way, Robert never mentioned James Hartley's name. Never made me explain. Never asked me to choose. For that I was almost grateful. Robert courted me properly. Slowly. The old-fashioned way. He didn't rush. He didn't make grand promises. He didn't talk about fate or destiny or love at first sight. He just showed up. Every week. Steady and solid and present. Like clockwork. Like something you could rely on. My mother approved immediately. "This is what a real man looks like, Margaret," she said one evening after Robert had gone home. "Not letters and dreams and promises from boys who disappear. Stability. Presence. A man who comes home every night." I wanted to argue. Wanted to defend James. Wanted to say that absence didn't mean abandonment, that silence didn't mean he'd stopped loving me. But I was tired. So tired of waiting. Tired of hoping. Tired of checking the mail for a letter that would never come. Tired of lying awake at night wondering if James was alive or dead or just done with me. Robert was easy. Robert was there. Maybe that was enough. In June 1945, 1 month after the war in Europe ended, Robert asked me to marry him. We were sitting on my parents' porch. The evening was warm, fireflies blinking in the yard. Somewhere down the street someone was playing music on a radio. Bing Crosby. "I'll Be Seeing You." The song they played for soldiers coming home. Robert took my hand. His palm was dry and warm and steady. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I know I'm not your first choice. I know there was someone else. But I promise I'll spend every day trying to be your best choice. I'll be good to you. I'll take care of you. I'll never leave you wondering." I looked at him. Really looked at him. At his honest face and his kind eyes and his steady hands. He meant it. Every word. Robert Caldwell was a man who kept his promises. And I was so tired of being sad. "Yes," I said. "I'll marry you, Robert." He smiled. Kissed my cheek gently, respectfully. Slipped his grandmother's ring onto my finger. It was a little too big. We'd have to get it sized. My mother cried happy tears at the wedding in August. Told everyone what a perfect match we were. How lucky I was to have found such a good man. Cried too. But not for the same reasons. At night, after the reception, after we'd driven to the little house Robert had rented, after he'd carried me over the threshold like you were supposed to, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked the same. But I felt like someone different. Like I'd left part of myself behind. The part that believed in hospital garden promises. The part that had waited. I took off James's photograph from my suitcase and put it at the bottom of my trunk. Covered it with sweaters and blankets. I was Mrs. Robert Coldwell now. It was time to forget. Robert and I had 3 children. Michael in 1946, born with Robert's steady temperament. Sarah in 1948, fierce and bright and full of questions. Thomas in 1951, named after my brother who'd come home from the war with scars he never talked about. We bought a house on Elm Street. 3 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a yard for the children to play in. Robert provided well. He was promoted to plant manager. We had a car, a Chevrolet. We had Sunday dinners and family vacations to the lake in summer. We had Christmas mornings with too many presents under the tree. I was a good wife. I learned to cook Robert's favorite meals. Pot roast on Sundays. Apple pie on birthdays. Kept the house clean. I sewed the children's clothes. I joined the PTA and volunteered at church and hosted book club meetings in my living room. Everyone said I had a good life. Blessed life. I should be grateful. And I was. I was grateful. But there was always something missing. A space inside me that I couldn't fill. Question I couldn't ask. A name I never spoke aloud but never stopped thinking about. What happened to James? On quiet mornings, when the children were at school and Robert was at work, I'd find myself standing at the window, looking at nothing. On wedding anniversaries, when Robert kissed me and told me he loved me, I'd smile and say it back and mean it, mostly. On nights when Robert slept beside me, breathing deep and steady, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder. I wondered if James was alive. If he thought of me. If he'd found someone else. If he'd kept his promise or broken it or forgotten it. I wondered if he remembered the hospital garden. The way he'd held my hand. The way he'd said my name like it was 2 words. Margaret Rose. I never said his name aloud. Not once in 53 years of marriage. But I thought about him. More than I should have. More than was fair to Robert. On our 25th wedding anniversary, Robert took me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Portland. We sat by the window overlooking the harbor. The same harbor where I used to watch the ships come in during the war. The same harbor I'd imagined James returning to. Robert ordered champagne. Made a toast. Told me I was still as beautiful as the day he'd met me. Then he held my hand across the table. His thumb rubbing gentle circles on my palm. I know I'm not your first choice, Margaret, he said quietly. It was the second time in 25 years he'd said those words. The first was when he'd proposed. Robert. I started to protest, but he shook his head. It's okay, he said. I've always known. I knew when I met you. I knew when I married you. I've known every day since. But I hope I've been a good second choice. I squeezed his hand. Felt tears in my eyes that I couldn't explain. You've been everything I needed, Robert. Everything. It wasn't a lie. Not completely. Robert had been good to me. Faithful. Present. Patient. He'd never raised his voice. Never drank too much. Never stayed out late. Never made me wonder or worry or wait. He'd given me a good life. Safe life. Everything my mother had promised me a good man would provide. Just not the life I'd dreamed of in a hospital garden in 1942. Robert died in 1998. Lung cancer. 60 years of smoking finally caught up with him. I held his hand as he went, and I meant it when I whispered, "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for staying." But even then, even in that moment, there was a part of me that wondered. What if James had come back? What if I'd waited just a little longer? What if my whole life had been built on the wrong choice? My mother died in the spring of 2007. She was 93 years old. Lived alone in the house where I grew up until the very end. Stubborn and sharp and convinced she always knew what was best. right up until the stroke took her in her sleep. We buried her beside my father on a cold April morning. The whole town came. Everyone said she'd lived a good long life. Everyone said we should be grateful she hadn't suffered. Then I had to clean out her house. That's how I found the box. I'd been sorting through her closet, deciding what to keep and what to donate. Her Sunday coat. Her wedding dress, yellowed but still beautiful. Hats and gloves and shoes that hadn't been worn in decades. That's when I saw it. Beneath the wedding dress, wrapped in tissue paper. A wooden box about the size of a shoebox. Dark wood brass hinges. The key was taped to the bottom. A small brass key on a piece of yellowed tape that crumbled when I touched it. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. Inside was a single letter. And underneath that letter were drafts. Papers covered in my mother's handwriting. Letters she'd written but never sent. Confessions. I sat down on the attic floor, dust swirling in the afternoon light. I opened James's letter first. After 63 years of silence, I was finally going to hear from him again. The paper was thin, wartime paper. I could almost see through it. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were still clear. His handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. Small and careful and slanting to the right. October 10th, 1944, somewhere in France. My dearest Margaret Rose. I don't have much time, so I'll say this plainly. I'm coming home. Not eventually. Not after the war. Today. Tomorrow. As soon as they can get me on a transport ship. I was shot down 3 weeks ago over occupied France. We were on our way back from a mission over Berlin. The lucky lady finally ran out of luck. She took a hit in the left engine. We couldn't make it back to England. I told the boys to bail out over France. Hoped the resistance would find us before the Germans did. They did. A farmer named Pascal and his wife Marie. They hid me in their barn for 2 weeks, patched up my burns, fed me their own rations even though they barely had enough for themselves. The resistance moved me through their networks. Farm to farm, basement to basement. Always moving, always hiding. Finally got me back to Allied lines 2 days ago. They're sending me stateside. Medical discharge. My flying days are over, Margaret, but I don't care. I don't care about any of it. Because it means I get to keep my promise. I'll be in Portland by October 20th. I've already wired your parents to let them know. I wanted to surprise you, show up at your door with flowers and that ring I promised. But I can't wait. I need you to know I'm alive. I'm whole. And I'm coming for you. I have the ring in my pocket right now. My grandmother's. I've carried it through 23 missions and a plane crash and 3 weeks hiding in French barns. Survived. I survived. We survived, Margaret Rose. I know it's been longer than I said. I know the letters probably stopped and you probably worried. Sorry. I'm so sorry. But I'm coming home now. Finally. For real this time. Wait for me just a little longer. Just a few more days. By the time you read this, I'll be days away from holding you again. Days away from keeping every promise I made in that hospital garden. I remember everything, Margaret Rose. Every word you said. Every smile. The way you rolled your eyes when I asked if you believed in fate. The way you held my hand like you were afraid to let go. I'm not letting go. Not now. Not ever. I'll see you in 10 days. And then I'm never leaving you again. All my love forever and always, your James. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the postmark again. October 15th, 1944. 5 days before James would have arrived in Portland. This letter had been mailed. Had been delivered. Someone had received it. Someone had opened it. Someone had read it. Someone had hidden it. For 63 years. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. Underneath James's letter were my mother's drafts. Letters she'd written to herself. Me. To God maybe. I don't know. Confessions. One was dated October 18th, 1944. 2 days before James would have arrived. The handwriting was rushed, frantic. Not like my mother's usual careful script. To Margaret. If you're reading this, I'm long gone, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe then you'll understand what I did and why I did it. The soldier came. Lieutenant Hartley. October 20th, 1944. Just like his letter said he would. I was the only one home. Your father was at work. You'd gone to visit Dorothy and the new baby. I'd gotten his telegram warning us he was coming. And I'd gotten his letter 5 days earlier. I burned the letter before you came home from the hospital that day. Threw it in the stove and watched it curl and blacken. I told myself I was protecting you. When he showed up at our door, I told him you'd moved on. I told him you were engaged to Robert Caldwell. I told him you'd found someone better. Someone who'd stayed. Someone steady and reliable. I told him you didn't want to see him. He didn't believe me at first. He tried to push past me at the door. This tall, thin boy in his uniform, burns still healing on his hands, crying. Actually crying. A grown man, a war hero, crying on our porch. Please, he said. Please, Mrs. Sullivan. I just need to see her. Just for a minute. Just to hear it from her. Please. But I stood firm. I blocked the door. I told him you'd said he was a childish dream. That you'd grown up while he was gone. That you'd realized what you really wanted was a real man, not a boy who made promises he couldn't keep. I told him you'd laughed when Robert proposed. That you'd said you couldn't believe you'd wasted 2 years waiting for someone who was never coming back. None of it was true. But I made him believe it. He stood there on our porch for what felt like hours. Just standing there, staring at me, tears running down his face. Finally, he asked if he could just see you. Just once. He said he'd leave right after. He just needed to hear it from you. Said no. I told him if he really loved you, he'd let you be happy. That seeing him would just confuse you. That you'd made your choice and he needed to respect it. Eventually, he left. I watched him walk down our street with his shoulders bent like I'd shot him. Like I'd killed something inside him. He kept stopping and turning back like he was hoping I'd change my mind. Or hoping you'd come running after him. But you didn't. Because you didn't know he was there. And I never told you. I know you'll hate me for this. I know if you're reading this, you're probably sitting in my attic crying and cursing my name. But Margaret, you need to understand. I did what any mother would do. Protected you. Boys like James Hartley don't come home right from war. I've seen it. Your Uncle Eddie came back from the First War and drank himself to death in 5 years. Your cousin Paul came back with nightmares so bad he couldn't hold a job. They come back broken. They come back with shaking hands and empty stares and rage they can't control. They drink. They hurt people. They leave. James Hartley would have broken your heart eventually. Maybe not right away, but eventually. The war changed him. I could see it in his eyes when he stood on our porch. He wasn't the boy you fell in love with anymore. Robert Caldwell was steady. Dependable. The kind of man who comes home every night. The kind who provides. The kind who doesn't have nightmares or drink or rage against things he can't control. I gave you a good life, Margaret. Safe life. The life I never had with your father and his drinking and his moods. You had 3 beautiful children. Nice home. A husband who loved you and never raised his hand to you and was there every single day. Would James Hartley have given you that? Would he have been stable? Or would he have given you years of worry and fear and broken promises? I made a choice for you. The choice your 19-year-old self couldn't make because she was still living in a dream. Chose your future. Chose your safety. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to understand. But I'd do it again. Because I'm your mother. And protecting you was always more important than making you happy. Mother. The letter ended there. No signature. Just that one word. Mother. Like it explained everything. Like it justified everything. I sat in that attic for 4 hours. The afternoon light faded to evening. The shadows grew long. Somewhere in the neighborhood, children were playing, their voices carrying through the open window. Someone was grilling dinner. The smell of charcoal and meat drifted up. Normal life. The world kept turning. I didn't cry. Couldn't. The tears were somewhere deep inside, frozen solid like they'd been for 63 years. I just sat there on the dusty floor, holding two pieces of paper that rewrote my entire life. James had come back. He'd kept his promise. Every single word of it. He'd survived the war and the crash and the resistance networks and the journey home. He'd carried his grandmother's ring through it all. He'd come back for me. And my mother had sent him away. She'd stood on our porch and lied to his face. Told him I didn't want him. Told him I'd moved on. Told him I'd laughed at the idea of marrying him. She'd watched him cry and didn't care. She'd watched him walk away broken and convinced herself she'd done the right thing. And then she'd burned his letter. Erased him from my life like he'd never existed. All those years I'd thought James had abandoned me. That he'd forgotten me. That I'd been foolish to wait for a boy who'd made promises he couldn't keep. I'd carried that wound for 63 years. That question. That doubt. What was wrong with me that he'd stopped loving me? What had I done wrong? Why hadn't I been worth coming back for? But I had been worth it. He'd come back. And I'd married another man 3 months later, never knowing he'd been standing on my porch, begging to see me one last time. I hired a private investigator the next day. His name was Dennis Cooper, recommended by my lawyer. He was professional and kind and didn't ask too many questions when an 84-year-old woman asked him to find a man who'd disappeared in 1944. Took 3 weeks. James Patrick Hartley had left Portland, Maine on October 21, 1944. The day after my mother sent him away. He'd taken a bus to California. As far away as he could get. He'd settled in San Francisco. Worked as a mechanic at a small airfield. Fixing planes but never flying them again. Never married. No children. Lived alone in a small apartment near the bay. He'd died in 1993 of a heart attack. 71 years old. Died alone in his apartment. The landlord found him 3 days later. The investigator found one more thing. In James's belongings, donated to a veteran's archive after his death, there was a journal. A small leather notebook he'd kept for 50 years. The archive sent me copies of the relevant pages. One entry, dated October 20, 1944, was underlined twice. The way James always underlined things that mattered. Went to see Margaret today. Her mother said she'd moved on. Engaged to someone else. Doesn't even want to see me. I asked to talk to her just for a minute, but her mother said no. Said I'd just confuse her. That Margaret had said I was a childish dream she'd outgrown. I don't blame her. I was gone too long. Made promises I couldn't guarantee. The war changed everything. Changed me. She was smart to choose someone who stayed. Someone steady. Someone who could give her a normal life. I hope he makes her happy. I hope he deserves her. I hope she forgets me. I never will. There were other entries over the years. Scattered. Brief. On what would have been our wedding anniversary. Would have been 5 years today. I wonder if she's happy. Years later. Saw a woman at the market today who looked like Margaret. Smile. It wasn't her. It's never her. But I still look. One of the last entries, dated 1992. A year before he died. I'm 70 now. Margaret would be 69. I wonder if she's still alive. I wonder if she ever thinks of me. I wonder if her mother ever told her I came back. Probably not. Probably better that way. Let her remember the boy in the hospital garden. Not the broken man on her porch. I lived for 6 more years after finding that letter. I never told my children. Never told anyone. What would I say? That their grandmother had stolen my life. That their father was my second choice. That I'd spent 53 years building a life on a lie. That every moment of their childhood, every birthday and Christmas and family dinner, every good memory we'd made, it was all built on the wreckage of something else. Someone else. None of that was fair to Robert. He'd been good to me. He'd loved me the best way he knew how. He'd given me everything he could. It wasn't his fault my mother had lied. It wasn't his fault I'd spent our entire marriage with part of my heart locked away. So I kept the secret. But something changed in me after that summer of 2007. My daughter Sarah noticed first. She said I seemed distant, distracted, like I was living in two places at once. Like I was having conversations with people who weren't there. Maybe I was. One foot in the life I'd lived. The good life. The safe life. The life with 3 children and Sunday dinners and a husband who came home every night. And one foot in the life I'd lost. The life with James. The small house by the ocean. The garden and the dog named Copper. The life we'd planned in 100 letters. Both lives were real. Both lives mattered. But only one had actually happened. And I'd never gotten to choose which one. I'm dying now. It's 2013. I'm 90 years old. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors say weeks, maybe days. My children are here. Sarah and Michael and Thomas. My grandchildren. Even some great-grandchildren I barely recognize. They think I'm sleeping, but I'm just lying here with my eyes closed, listening to them talk in hushed voices in the hallway. Sarah is crying. She's always been the emotional one. I don't understand, she's saying. She seems so sad. Like she's been sad for years and we never noticed. My daughter. My sweet, perceptive daughter. She comes in and sits beside my bed. Takes my hand. Mom, she whispers. Do you have any regrets? Open my eyes. Look at her. My daughter. 55 years old with gray in her hair and Robert's kind eyes. I had a good life, I finally say. That wasn't the question, Mom. I close my eyes again. Feel tears sliding down my temples into my hair. I married a good man. I raised beautiful children. I have nothing to complain about. Sarah squeezes my hand. But it wasn't the life you chose, was it? How does she know? How can she tell? I squeeze back barely. My strength is almost gone. No, I whisper. It wasn't. She starts to cry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Don't be, I say. I still got to love. I still got to be loved. Just differently than I planned. Did you ever tell Dad? Your father knew. He always knew. He was kinder about it than I deserved. Those are almost my last words. But not quite. Right before I close my eyes for the last time, I whisper something. Sarah leans in close to hear, but the words are too soft. Too faint. She asks me to repeat it, but I'm already slipping away. Later, she tells my other children that she thought I said a name. Not Robert. Not any of theirs. James. Maybe I did. Maybe after 90 years, I finally got to say it out loud without fear or guilt or shame. Wait for me, Margaret Rose. I'm coming home to you. He'd kept his promise. He'd come back. And my mother had sent him away. I lived a good life. I'm grateful for it. For Robert and my children and all the years of ordinary happiness. But somewhere in whatever comes after this, I hope James is waiting. I hope he knows I never stopped loving him. That I kept his photograph at the bottom of my trunk for 60 years. That I thought of him on quiet mornings and wedding anniversaries and nights when I couldn't sleep. I hope he knows I didn't choose to let him go. The choice was stolen from me. And maybe, in whatever comes next, we'll finally get the life we planned in ink and paper. The house by the ocean. The garden. The dog named Copper. Maybe death is just another kind of going home. I waited, James. I waited my whole life. I'm still waiting.